Welcome. Thank you for joining us for another session of LinkedIn Live from Duke University's Fuqua School of Business. I'm David Ridley. I'm a health economist. Maybe you've heard that a vaccine for the novel coronavirus disease is just around the corner. Many industry executives have said so. The Trump administration has said so. The Trump administration is using Operation Warp Speed, led by Moncef Slaoui. Dr. Slaoui said he's very confident that we're going to get a couple 100 million doses of the vaccine this year. So by the end of 2020, hundreds of millions of doses. He's confident about large-scale vaccine manufacturing this year, but I'm not. In this session, I'll tell you why you probably won't receive a COVID vaccine jab this year or even next year. And I'll also answer your questions. So if you have questions for me, please put them in the comments. I'll talk for 5 or 10 minutes and then I'll take your questions. I'll quickly tell you about my background. I've been working on incentives in the drug industry for about 20 years. And about 15 years ago, a team of me and Jeff Moe and Henry Grabowski proposed a priority review voucher, and it became law. And that law creates an incentive for drug development and vaccine development for infectious diseases. Creates a market of more than $1 billion and has led many treatments to reach the market. So I've been looking at incentives for drug and vaccine development for a while. And more recently, I've also been focused on manufacturing issues, and that informs my discussion today. I want to start off by talking to you about a couple of mistakes in thinking about when and why we'll get a COVID vaccine in the near future. I think the first mistake is that people are misinterpreting optimism at vaccine makers as being likelihood. So around here at Duke University, we're used to winning championships. And so imagine if a student athlete said, I think we're going to win a championship this year. I think that's exactly the right attitude for that student athlete. And it's even plausible because we've won championships here, but you really shouldn't go out and buy your championship t-shirts just yet. That's a little premature. So I think vaccine industry executives are sort of talking the same way. We're optimistic, we're going to make this happen. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, at least not in the near future and not at scale. Every drug maker, every vaccine maker, when they're starting out, when they test a drug or a vaccine in people, they think it's going to be big, or they wouldn't spend millions of dollars testing it. So every drug that goes into phase 1 has really high expectations. And yet only 1 out of 8 drugs that go into phase 1 testing actually make it to market. So 7 out of 8 molecules going into phase 1 testing fail. And each time the drug maker was optimistic, we didn't necessarily get one. Now, fortunately, in this case, we're taking a lot of shots on goal. A lot of companies are involved, and I'll talk about those companies. But the first mistake I think we're making is hearing optimistic executives and leaders and saying, this is going to happen. It's not necessarily going to happen. Okay, the second mistake that I think some executives are making is that they are overestimating their ability to scale up their manufacturing. So most drug company CEOs come from the commercial side. They launched a great product, had a lot of success selling it. They're good at selling drugs. And they sort of take for granted that this drug will get made. And because that's all happening behind the scenes. And I think they underestimate just how much is happening behind the scenes and how much time and effort it takes to scale up manufacturing to the scale we'll need. And we're going to need massive scale. So if you think about the population of the world, let's say 7.5 billion people. And so we need vaccines for billions of people. And if everybody gets 2 doses of the vaccine, then we'll need 15 billion doses for everybody. And it's quite reasonable to expect that we would need 2 doses of many of these vaccines. So the first dose sort of introduces it to your body. And then the second dose get your body ready to fight the disease the next time. You know how this works. For those of you who have been teenagers or are teenagers, you know that, for example, with the Gardasil vaccine, initially they were saying 3 doses, but now that's down to 2 doses. It's pretty common to need multiple doses of a vaccine. And so it's reasonable to think that we'll need 2 for this one as well. Some of the early trials being done right now, they give you the first dose and then wait a month and give you the second dose. So if that's the case, to vaccinate everybody in the world, that's 15 billion doses. Now, fortunately, we go a long way not vaccinating everybody. If we just vaccinated healthcare workers, especially in emergency departments, if we just vaccinated people working in long-term care, if we just vaccinated people working in grocery stores, that would do a lot of good. But the point of my talk is that you should not expect to be vaccinated unless you're a member of one of those populations, at least not anytime soon, because to get us to tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions of doses, it's going to take us years. So unless you're one of those special people, the nursing home worker, the emergency department worker, the grocery store worker, the business school professor. I think business school professors are surely toward the top of the list, right? Right? I mean, who's more important to society? So unless you're one of those select few, you shouldn't be expecting to get vaccinated in the near future. Let me give you a little more information about some of the manufacturers that I'm thinking about in this space. So I want to talk to you about really the 6 biggest vaccine makers. And I'm going to put them in buckets. It's not perfect, but I'm going to say we've got 2 optimists, we've got 2 mixed, and we've got 2 pessimists. So I'm going to take the major vaccine makers. The reason I'm going to talk about the major vaccine makers is that they're the ones with the wisdom of experience, and they're the ones with the capacity to build at scale. I'm not saying that small manufacturers don't matter. They matter a lot. So much innovation comes from the small, but they don't have the wisdom of experience. Moderna, for example, is getting a lot of attention. They've never commercialized a product. So while I think I'm hopeful for them, I want to start with the big ones because they have the wisdom of experience and they have the capacity. Okay, so let's talk about the 6 big ones. Let's start with the optimists. Let's start with Sanofi and AstraZeneca. I think Sanofi is promising. So I hope you've heard of Sanofi. They're a major vaccine maker. They've been in the news a little lately because they initially said, hey, the US will get some of the first doses because the US government has been investing. But they're a French company, so the French government said, what the heck? And so they were in the news a little bit. Okay, sorry, no, the French get it first. So Sanofi's been in the news. Sanofi, as I said, a very successful vaccine maker and very generous about jumping into the big problems in the world. They jumped in on Zika. They jumped in on dengue. And I salute them for that. They're a fabulous company. However, they backed out of Zika. So the prevalence of Zika was fading. They were haggling on the price. The US government was saying, boy, the price better not be too high. And Sanofi walked away. So a year and a half after signing up to work on Zika, Sanofi said, to heck with this. Dengue, they did succeed, but the dengue vaccine is problematic because the second time you get dengue is the worst. So if you get the Sanofi vaccine the first time, then the second time you get the disease is going to be miserable. You only want to give the vaccine to people who've already been exposed to dengue. So they have a dengue vaccine, but it's just not great. Okay, so that's Sanofi. I applaud them for being in. I think they can get up to some scale. They're talking about maybe a couple 100 million quickly, maybe. I mean, that's not even enough for Europe, let alone the United States. But I salute Sanofi. Then there's AstraZeneca. Sanofi's French, AstraZeneca's British. AstraZeneca is working with the British University Oxford. Oxford's been working on a coronavirus vaccine for a long time. So that gives me some hope about AstraZeneca because they've been at this for a while. AstraZeneca also one of the companies that's optimistic, and we should be optimistic about them. Okay, those are the 2 optimists. Mixed messages from a couple other companies. Let's talk about Pfizer and Merck. Pfizer's CEO is all in. If you wrote a recent piece about him, he said, we're going to get this done, no matter what my scientists and manufacturing people say. Well, hold on. His scientists and manufacturing people are saying this ain't going to happen quickly. And he's saying, yes, it will. It makes for a great story. Unfortunately, it makes for a great movie. But who are you going to believe? Okay, so mixed messages on Pfizer. Also mixed messages on Merck. Merck had been absent. So Merck, and when I think of the major vaccine makers, I think of Merck and GSK and Sanofi. Only Sanofi was in until yesterday. Yesterday, Merck got in. So Merck was really late getting in. Why? Because according to the head of R&D, this is going to be super hard. Let's see, what did he say? Here, a quote from the head of Merck's R&D. We're tasked with creating a new vaccine in 1/10 of the time and must manufacture at 1,000 times the scale compared to what Merck had done with the Ebola vaccine. So this is a lot harder than what Merck did with Ebola, and it took Merck years with Ebola. So Merck's head of R&D, the other quote from him is he said he's approaching the problem with enthusiasm, but also humility. So he's making the point that they're in, and I'm glad they're in, but he's making the point that it's going to be hard and it's going to take some time, and we should have reasonable expectations about this. Okay, so those are the mixed messages. Let me do the pessimists now. The two companies, the major vaccine makers of the past decade that I'm going to call the pessimists are, number one, GSK. GSK is not in. So GSK is one of the 3 leading vaccine makers. They're nowhere to be found. It's not quite fair. They've said they'll donate their adjuvant to Sanofi to help make Sanofi's vaccine better, but that's really not being, they're not going to be making any COVID vaccine from GSK so far. It's possible they're doing things behind the scenes like Merck was doing things behind the scenes, but so far it looks like GSK is out. Likewise, Novartis. So Novartis is actually not currently a major vaccine maker. They were until they sold their vaccine business to GSK 5 years ago. But here's a quote from, let me see if I can find a quote from the Novartis CEO. Here's what Novartis CEO said. So Novartis is out. Any vaccine to fight the new coronavirus will not be ready for use for at least 2 years. So quote from Novartis, which used to be one of the major vaccine makers, their CEO says, this ain't happening for another 2 years. Okay, so there we got a couple of optimists, Sanofi and AstraZeneca, a couple mixed messages, Pfizer and Merck, and then a couple pessimists, Novartis and GSK. So mixed messages here. Frankly, maybe one is enough, right? Maybe we don't need everybody to be optimistic. Maybe if one company is optimistic and gets it done, that's fantastic. Can they make billions of doses quickly? I'd say no way. Can they make hundreds of millions in the next couple of years? Maybe. So I think those of us who are optimists should expect tens of millions, hundreds of millions of doses in the next few years, but not billions, not 15 billion, not enough for the whole world. So I hope we get lucky and one of these succeeds, but it's going to take some luck. Okay, I think those are the points I wanted to cover. And so let's take some, let me see if we got some questions coming in. We do, thank you. Yeah, so great questions. So Carlos Gonzalez, one of our alumni, thank you for joining us, Carlos. Number of vaccines in phase 1 trials. I need to look that up. There's some awesome sources out there. So Nature, I've not looked at Nature in the last couple of days, but Nature has a great list of who's in this game. And so there are a lot of products in phase 1, and surely more to come. Merck's not in phase 1 yet, but soon will be. But several companies are in phase 1. So if you and a related question from Julie Fullerton, also an alumna, about success of drugs versus success of vaccines. So if we think if we're thinking in the right way about 1 in 8 making it, and if we've got 8 in phase 1 now, those odds look pretty good. So I think both what Carlos and Julie are implying is we're taking a lot of shots on goal, and even if it's just 1 in 8, and somewhere in that ballpark, even if it's just 1 in 8, we should feel pretty good about things. And I'm with you. I do feel good about things. What I don't feel good about is getting to that it's certain that it's going to be 100% effective and that it's going to be made at scale. So my concern is, if you want to make it, let's say these vaccines do make it, and let's say FDA is really lenient and says, we just need an immune response. We don't need to show that actually people aren't getting COVID. We're going to let you test it in a lot of people. You can actually find those people. Let's say all those things go perfectly. It still takes time to run that, and it still takes time to make it. You need several years of lead time for manufacturing. You need to be welding miles of stainless steel pipe now. So you've only got a 1 in 8 chance of making it, but you need to be welding stainless steel pipe in a major facility that's going to make your vaccine today, if you want it even a chance of it at massive scale next year. So building off what Carlos and Julie said in the comments, I think you are right to be optimistic that we're going to get something. What you shouldn't count on is that it's going to be here tomorrow in terms of approval. And what you definitely shouldn't count on is that it's going to be made at scale in the near future. Let's look at some more questions. One question here about what sort of price should we expect for vaccine makers? So flu vaccine's $20. Gardasil is $200. I think the US price will be somewhere between $20 and $100. I think most vaccine makers will be really shy about being seen to be profiteering, to be charging high prices, to doing much more than covering costs. So I would guess that the US price is going to be closer to $20, but I could see it going as high as $200, which is the price of Gardasil, the human papillomavirus vaccine, or Prevnar, the pneumococcal vaccine. What's your price going to be in the United States, you, US citizen? My guess is it's going to be free. So I think your insurer will cover it. I think the government will cover it. The government will cover it for kids, for the Vaccines for Children program. Your insurers will cover it. Little secret, your insurers are doing great financially right now. Your insurer, none of you are getting elective surgeries. Your insurers have a lot of cash on hand. They're going to have no problem paying $20, $200 for your vaccine. Other countries, however, if it's your government paying for your vaccine, your government may be in rougher financial shape. But your private insurers are going to be in good shape. And this is going to be a bargain. So the price is not going to be a barrier, I don't think. And then in poorer countries, I would think the price would be somewhere between $5 and $10. So right now, Merck sells Gardasil in poorer countries for about $5 a jab. I could see them going up to, say, $10. Let's see what other questions we have here. Okay, so if I'm right and we're not going to have enough doses, who gets it? And that's something we need to be thinking about right now. And my colleagues at the Margolis Center have been thinking about that, both for therapeutics and for vaccines. And it's actually I think very different population. Who gets the drug, like remdesivir, I think is a very different discussion than who gets the vaccine. I think those are different populations. I think who gets the drug and who gets the drug is a real relevant question right now with remdesivir. Gilead, the manufacturer, sort of handed that off to the government and said, you figure it out. And the Trump administration started giving it out and then said, whoa, maybe we're doing this wrong. We need a rule. We need transparency. Okay, so who gets remdesivir? I think vulnerable populations. Who gets the vaccine? People who have a lot of interactions. So on the interactions, I already mentioned those, especially those long-term care staff, nursing home staff, healthcare workers, frontline workers. And that's different from the vulnerable with the drugs. One reason I think inoculating the nursing home staff makes more sense than inoculating all of the people in the nursing home for a couple of reasons. One is that the people in the nursing home have really weaker immune reactions. So the vaccine actually doesn't work quite as well for them anyway. And furthermore, if you can sort of contain them and protect them, meanwhile the nursing home staffers going home and coming and seeing family and coming back, that's the person I'd want to vaccinate earlier. And if we get hundreds of millions of doses, we can vaccinate those sorts of healthcare workers around the world. But this is going to be an important question for ethicists and others to be thinking about now, well before we get the vaccines made. Scrolling down. Oh, Tanner Beam. Okay. Will they relax GMP, good manufacturing practice? That's a great question. So how much will FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, relax their standards? Tanner asked about it for, in terms of manufacturing, with good manufacturing practices, current good manufacturing practices. We can also ask the same question about clinical trials. How much should FDA relax their standards? It's going to be hard for FDA to relax their standards. This is how they do things, and for a reason. And they also worry about negative spillovers. Like, what if they relax too much and people get a bad vaccine? Does that embolden the anti-vaxxers? Does that make it? Does that make people less willing to get the measles vaccine if there are some adverse reactions to the COVID vaccine? So this is a really interesting question. FDA gets it. They hear everybody shouting at them, lower your standards. We got to get these drugs and vaccines. They hear it, but they'll be careful. Now, FDA has relaxed their standards at times. So, for example, there was the Duchenne muscular dystrophy drug for very rare, very small patient population. It didn't have statistically significant results. So usually FDA says no to that. Janet Woodcock, who heads the drug part of FDA, she approved it anyway. So FDA said, we're going to lower our standards. We're not going to require statistical significance because we're so desperate for patients to have hope in this population. And it's such a small population, it's hard to get to statistical significance anyway. So FDA has relaxed their standards at times. You could argue FDA relaxed their standards with regard to diagnostics recently, and now maybe are regretting it. So initially, FDA was criticized for being slow to approve diagnostics. Then they were criticized for letting some diagnostics on the market that have a really high rate of false positives or false negatives. So, and now they're getting some heat about that. So FDA hears you. They'll relax a little bit. Some of the FDA regulation that Tanner asked about good manufacturing practice, some of that's about paperwork. Did you check the boxes right? FDA should be cool about that stuff. But FDA won't totally let down their regulations for fear of setting a bad precedent, for fear of hurting people. Remember, vaccines have to be super safe. Like, if you're giving this vaccine to 1,000 people, they're otherwise healthy. And only a few of them would really suffer adverse consequences from the coronavirus disease. So if you can't give them a vaccine that hurts them. FDA has very high standards for vaccines, and that's going to come into play here. Yeah, so Thiago has a question about how intellectual property will be treated. It's a very interesting question. Let's look at the drugs for just a moment and the behavior of Gilead. So Gilead was given 7 years of orphan drug exclusivity for remdesivir, for the new indication. And Gilead said, no thanks. So the government wanted to give Gilead exclusivity for their drug, and they said no, because they didn't want all the political heat. Likewise, Gilead has not been really effectively not enforcing its patents in poor countries for its hepatitis C drugs. It's allowed generic manufacturers to make their drug and sell it for 1% of the US price. So I think companies will be reluctant to enforce intellectual property protections for their products in poor countries. I think they'll want to do it in rich countries. But I think they'll also be willing to partner with other manufacturers. Now, it's one thing with Gilead partnering with other manufacturers to make pills, which are really simple to make. So you can have a generic manufacturer make your pills. That's what Gilead did with hepatitis C drugs. Manufacturing your vaccine is much more complicated. So I can see them being willing to license. I can see them willing to forego their patent protection in poor countries. Rich countries, I think they're going to probably want their patent protection. However, governments might not give it to them. So when we had around the 9/11 back in 2001, there was eagerness for an anthrax antibiotic, Cipla, and the Republican president and his administration said we might ignore patents for this drug because we're so eager to get it. So Republican US administration said we might ignore patent rights because this is an emergency. So even the US might not be so enthusiastic about providing patent protection. So that's a long way of saying it'll be squishy. But the vaccine makers should know this. The vaccine makers are not getting in this to get rich. They're getting in this to be heroes and to do good in the world. And I salute them for that. Yeah, so some people have been asking, what about Johnson & Johnson? I said the 6 big vaccine makers, and I left out J&J. J&J is, one of the biggest drug companies. If you count J&J's drugs and medical devices and shampoo, they're arguably the biggest. But I don't think of them as a vaccine maker. Now, I salute them. They did get into the Ebola space, and I salute them for that. But that's small scale, took them years. I don't think of J&J as being one of the major vaccine makers, but they're in, and I salute them for that. And I hope they surprise me. But I just want to talk about the big 6 because I think they have the wisdom of experience and the greater scale. But J&J is a big company with a lot of resources, and I'm delighted they're in. Scrolling around. Yeah, what do I think about the mRNA vaccine developers? This is a question from David. I'm so glad we have Moderna out there, for example, and boy, so are investors. Moderna stock has done very well. I love it. I'm glad we're using, there's so many different approaches to this vaccine, and I'm thrilled. But Moderna's never commercialized a product before. And so, I focused on the big 6 because they have the wisdom of experience and the scale. I'm so glad we've got other companies taking a shot at this. But I don't expect, but do note they've never commercialized a product before. And so this is going to take them a while. They might do it, and their product is awesome if it works and can be scaled. The technology is such that it can be scaled, but I discount them again because they're small and new. Do I have time for one more? I don't think I have to. This is fun. I love this. But I really should wrap. So, because we're up against the hour. So let me say 4 things before we go, if I can squeeze them in 1 minute. So number 1, please follow Fuqua on LinkedIn so you can see events like this. Number 2, if you enjoyed David R. this week, you're going to love David R. next week. So I'm David Ridley. Next week, we have David Robinson. So David Robinson's a Fuqua finance professor. He'll talk about the availability of equity for small businesses. 2 other things I want to say before I wrap. The other is a happy birthday, Julia Grant. Tomorrow's Julie's birthday. Julia is a Duke alumnus with a birthday Thursday. And finally, you can tell I'm pessimistic about scale in the near term, but honestly, I'm overall an optimist. I think we human beings are incredibly creative and resilient. I think we're going to get some new therapeutics, and new therapeutics don't have to be made at the same scale as vaccines because not everybody's going to need the therapeutic. We'll get some new therapeutics. We'll repurpose some old therapeutics. We'll be smart about how we interact. We'll take care of people in nursing homes. We're going to get through this.